In 2001, a journalist asked Enron's CEO a simple question. He asked if Enron was in trouble. The CEO looked him dead in the eye and called him an obscenity, live, on a recorded earnings call. That CEO was Jeff Skilling. At the time, Enron was the 7th largest company in America. 3 months later, it was gone. But here's the thing that nobody talks about. Skilling wasn't lying to that journalist. He genuinely believed Enron was fine, right up until it wasn't. And that's the most dangerous kind of CEO in business, not the one who lies to everyone else. The one who lies to themselves first. Okay, so here's something that shows up in almost every major corporate collapse. Before the company dies, the CEO stops seeing it clearly. Not because they're stupid, not because they're evil, but because success rewires the brain. Harvard researchers call this the hubris effect. It's what happens when a leader wins enough times and starts believing the wins were entirely because of them. Losses get blamed on bad luck, bad markets, difficult employees. Economists call this self-attribution bias. It's a cognitive trap where you take credit for everything that goes right and assign blame for everything that goes wrong. And here's where it gets dangerous. Once a CEO stops seeing failure as their own, they also stop seeing the warning signs. Because the warning signs start looking like temporary problems, not structural collapse, not their fault, just noise. And by the time the noise gets loud enough to hear, it's usually too late. Let's look at Jeff Skilling again. Skilling was genuinely brilliant, Harvard MBA, McKinsey partner, one of the smartest executives of his generation. And Enron under his leadership was genuinely innovative. But somewhere along the way, Skilling built a culture where bad news simply didn't reach him. Employees who raised concerns got pushed out. Analysts who questioned the numbers got attacked. He didn't just hide Enron's problems from investors, he hid them from himself. When Enron collapsed, $74 billion in shareholder value was destroyed. 20,000 people lost their jobs. And Skilling, right up to the end, believed the company was fundamentally sound. Then there's Elizabeth Holmes. She built the Ranos on one promise, that a single drop of blood could test for hundreds of diseases. She had no working technology, but she had absolute conviction. And she surrounded herself with people who either believed her or were too afraid to say otherwise. Her board of directors, full of former generals and secretaries of state, never pushed back hard enough. Investors never got access to verify the claims. And Holmes herself, she never seemed to fully accept that the technology wasn't real. Psychologists who studied her case noted something interesting. She may have crossed the line between deception and genuine self-belief. She had convinced herself the technology would work before it did, before it ever did. That's not a fraudster's mindset. That's a CEO who had completely lost contact with objective reality. And then there's the quieter version. Jim Keyes, the last CEO of Blockbuster. No fraud, no fake technology. Just a man who walked into a burning building and genuinely didn't smell smoke. In 2008, with Netflix at 8 million subscribers and growing, Keyes publicly said he didn't see Netflix as a competitor. His reasoning. Blockbuster had more locations, more brand recognition, more physical infrastructure, all true, all completely irrelevant. He was measuring the wrong things, and nobody in the building told him, or if they did, he didn't hear it. Blockbuster filed for bankruptcy 2 years later. So why does this keep happening? Research by Malmendier and Tate, 2 economists at Berkeley, found that overconfident CEOs are significantly more likely to make value-destroying acquisitions. They overpay, they overexpand, they overleverage. And they do it because they genuinely believe they can make it work, even when the data says otherwise. There's another force driving this. It's called confirmation bias. Once a CEO has committed to a strategy publicly, their brain starts filtering information. Data that supports the strategy gets amplified, data that challenges it gets dismissed, or rationalized or buried. And here's the structural problem that makes all of this worse. The higher you go in any organization, the less honest feedback you receive, not because people are dishonest, because they're afraid. Nobody wants to be the person who tells the CEO they're wrong, so the CEO gets surrounded by agreement, and the agreement slowly replaces reality. Here's what's striking about every major corporate collapse. The warning signs were visible, well in advance. Enron's accounting practices were questioned by analysts years before the collapse. The Ranos had engineers internally raising concerns for years before John Carreyrou broke the story. Blockbuster had franchise owners begging leadership to take streaming seriously. In every case, the information was there, but it couldn't reach the top. Or when it did reach the top, it got reframed. That analyst doesn't understand our model. Those engineers aren't seeing the big picture. Streaming is a niche. Our customers are loyal. This is what self-deception looks like from the inside. It doesn't feel like lying. It feels like staying the course. It feels like conviction. And here's what that costs. Enron's collapse wiped out $74 billion in shareholder value. The Ranos raised $700 million from investors for technology that didn't work. Blockbuster, once worth $6 billion, sold for $320 million in salvage value. These aren't just financial numbers. They're retirement savings gone, careers ended, families affected, all downstream of one recurring failure, a leader who stopped seeing themselves clearly. So what's the takeaway? The most dangerous moment for any company isn't when it's struggling. It's when it's succeeding. Because success is when hubris sets in. Success is when feedback stops. Success is when a CEO starts confusing their judgment with reality. The best leaders in history didn't avoid failure because they were smarter. They avoided it because they kept mechanisms in place to hear the truth, even when the truth was uncomfortable, especially when the truth was uncomfortable. If this changed how you think about leadership and business failure, subscribe.